It was late afternoon, that quiet hour when the house feels like it's breathing with you. I was in the kitchen, the smell of garlic and rosemary wrapping around me like a warm blanket. The light outside was fading, casting long shadows across the counter while I chopped vegetables, half humming to myself. That's when my phone lit up on the counter, an unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. The moment I answered, I heard it. A trembling voice, the kind that makes your stomach drop before you even know why. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but I'm pregnant, and your husband is the father." My breath caught. The spoon in my hand clinked against the pot, a sound so sharp it cut right through the haze flooding my head. She said her name, Melissa, like it was the punchline to some cruel joke. And then, click. The line went dead. I stood there frozen, knife still in my hand but my grip weak. My mind raced, clawing for an explanation, some harmless misunderstanding I could cling to. But there was none. The silence in that kitchen was thick, pressing against me until I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The first thing I felt was shock, raw and suffocating. But beneath it, something darker started to burn. Suspicion. And right under that, a resolve I didn't yet recognize, but I knew it would change everything. I leaned against the counter, my palms flat on the cool granite, trying to anchor myself. The dinner I'd been making moments ago now smelled too strong, almost bitter in the air. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. At least not only from fear. It was the kind of tremble that comes when your mind is sprinting ahead of your body, already piecing together the moments you might have missed, the signs you ignored. Every late night, every vague excuse, every flicker of his eyes when I asked a simple question. They started lining up like a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The name Melissa kept circling in my head, loud enough to drown out everything else. I didn't know her face, but now she felt like an uninvited shadow in my home. I imagined her voice again, shaking, almost apologetic, though I couldn't tell if it was guilt or pride that made it quiver. My mind began playing scenes that had never happened but felt real. David with her, somewhere that wasn't here, his hand on her back, whispering the same words he'd once said to me. I hated that my own imagination could betray me like that. I reached for my phone again, staring at the call log like the number might give me answers, but all it did was sit there, a silent dare on the screen. My first instinct was to call David right away, demand the truth, force it out of him before the lie could grow legs. But something in me, something I didn't quite trust yet, told me to wait, to breathe, to think. And that whisper inside, it was already starting to sound like a plan. I turned off the stove, letting the pan cool in the silence. My appetite was gone, replaced by a sharp awareness of every detail around me. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, the way the fading sunlight painted the walls in gold and shadow. Everything felt too still, as if the house was holding its breath along with me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to scream, cry, or just stand there until time started moving again. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I could hear David's laugh, the one I used to love. And now it made my stomach twist. How long had I been living with a stranger? How many times had I looked him in the eyes without seeing what was right there? The thought hit me hard. Maybe this call wasn't a mistake or an accident. Maybe it was meant for me. A gift wrapped in cruelty, but still a gift. A chance to see the truth before it consumed me. I walked to the sink, rinsed my hands under the cold water, and looked at my reflection in the kitchen window. My face was pale, but my eyes, they didn't look broken. They looked alert, calculating. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And as the light outside slipped away, so did any trace of the woman who'd just been cooking dinner, waiting for her husband to come home. Something new was settling in. Something that would carry me straight into what came next. That night I barely slept. I lay there in the dark, listening to David's steady breathing beside me, wondering how many lies were hidden in that calm rhythm. The phone in my nightstand drawer felt like it was burning through the wood, begging me to pick it up, to scroll through every message, every call, until I found her. But he'd changed his password a few weeks ago, claiming it was for work security. Back then, I'd let it slide. Now, it felt like a padlock on the truth. When the morning light spilled into the room, it wasn't warm. It was sharp, almost surgical, cutting through every excuse he'd ever given me. I watched him get dressed for work, his tie perfectly knotted, his cologne thick in the air. That same cologne that suddenly made my skin crawl. He kissed my cheek like nothing had changed. But something had. Everything had. I smiled back, because I knew now that pretending was my most powerful weapon. The moment the door shut behind him, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee notebook open. I started writing down every odd detail from the last few months. The sudden, urgent meetings, the dinners with clients, the unexplained withdrawals from our bank account. I connected them like dots on a map, and the picture they formed was ugly. I didn't have proof yet, but I could feel it in my bones. The call was real, and Melissa wasn't just a voice on the line. She was a storm already inside my life. I decided to test the waters. That afternoon, I called David at the office, asking something simple: what time he'd be home. His pause before answering was barely 2 seconds, but to me, it was an alarm bell. "Might be late." "A meeting ran over," he said, voice too casual, too rehearsed. I hung up and stared at the phone, my fingers drumming against the table. If I confronted him now, he'd have an excuse ready. Men like David always did. What I needed wasn't a fight. I needed evidence. By evening, I was online, scrolling through the websites of private investigators. It felt strange, like I was breaking some unspoken rule of marriage. But he'd already shattered those vows for me. I chose one with a reputation for discretion and a track record of results. When we spoke, I kept my voice steady, explaining the situation in the simplest terms. The man on the other end didn't sound surprised. "If she's pregnant and your husband's involved, we'll find out," he said. Something about the confidence in his tone settled me. The next few days were a blur of routine laced with anticipation. Every text from the investigator made my pulse quicken. I still played the part of the oblivious wife, smiling at dinner, asking about his day, pretending to believe every word. But inside, I was waiting for the moment the truth would arrive, neatly packaged, undeniable. When it came, I thought I was ready. I wasn't. The email landed in my inbox on a Thursday morning. No subject line, just an attachment. I opened it, and there they were, photo after photo of David with Melissa. Sometimes they were in broad daylight, other times under the soft glow of a street lamp. Her hand was on his arm in every single one, the kind of touch that doesn't belong to strangers. My throat went dry as I clicked through them, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The final image made me stop breathing. David, leaning down to kiss her, his wedding ring catching the light. Attached was the investigator's brief report, concise and brutal. They'd been meeting for months, restaurants, hotels. The withdrawals from our account? Gifts? Expensive ones? I read it twice, each word etching itself into my skin. It wasn't just a fling. It was a double life. The pregnancy call wasn't just real. It was the tip of the iceberg. I closed my laptop and stared at the wall, feeling the burn of betrayal settle deeper than I thought possible. But under that pain, something sharper began to take shape. This wasn't going to be a screaming match or a tearful plea. No, I'd make sure David's betrayal cost him far more than a marriage. And for that, I'd need time. And a plan. The hardest part was acting like nothing had changed. Every morning, I poured his coffee, kissed him goodbye, and watched him walk out the door as if my hands weren't itching to shove the photos in his face. But patience, I told myself, was a weapon. I started making quiet trips to the bank, copying every financial document I could get my hands on. Tax returns, account statements, property deeds. Each paper felt like a brick, and I was building a wall between us, one he wouldn't be able to climb when the time came. I met with my lawyer in a discreet office across town, a place David would never think to look. She listened without interrupting, her pen moving steadily across the page as I laid everything out. When I showed her the photos and played the recorded call, her brow arched just slightly. "You've got more than enough to protect yourself," she said. "Now it's about making sure he can't touch what's yours." I walked out of there with a new sense of clarity and a strategy. It was during those meetings that I learned something I hadn't expected. Melissa had a history, a pattern. She'd been involved with married men before, always in relationships that came with money attached. She wasn't just after David, she was after a lifestyle. That made me furious, but also oddly calm. If she thought she was playing a game, she hadn't realized I'd already started rewriting the rules. At home, I became an observer in my own marriage. I studied his movements, his tone, the way he avoided eye contact when I asked the simplest questions. Every lie he told was like a loose thread, and I was pulling them one by one, unraveling the fabric of the life we'd built. He didn't notice. He thought he was still in control. That was the part that almost made me smile. Almost. I began to shift money quietly, moving what I could into accounts he didn't know about. My lawyer helped me draft documents that would freeze joint access the moment I gave the word. Each step was precise, deliberate. There was no rush. Revenge, I realized, is sweeter when it's patient. At night, I'd lie awake beside him, listening to him breathe, knowing he had no idea the ground beneath him was already cracking. Sometimes I wondered what Melissa would think if she knew what was coming. Would she panic? Run? Or would she stay, convinced she could win? Either way, I was done being the woman in the dark. I wasn't just preparing to confront them. I was preparing to end them, at least in the version of life they'd been living at my expense. The more I planned, the lighter I began to feel. Not happy, not yet, but stronger, like I'd taken back a part of myself I didn't even know I'd lost. I started walking in the mornings, using the quiet streets as my thinking space. Each step was a reminder that I wasn't powerless. I was the one holding the cards now, and every day, I was stacking the deck higher in my favor. One morning, I passed a boutique and stopped, staring at my reflection in the glass. My eyes looked sharper, my posture straighter. I realized I wasn't just preparing for an ending. I was preparing for a beginning. A life where I didn't have to second-guess every word from his mouth. A life that was mine alone. That thought carried me through the rest of the day like a secret I couldn't wait to reveal. Still, there was a final piece missing. The moment. The one perfect scene where the truth would spill out, not in whispers or accusations, but in a way that left no room for denial. I didn't know when or how it would happen yet, but I knew when it did, David wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The night I chose was ordinary on the surface, at least for him. David walked through the door right on schedule, setting his briefcase by the couch like he always did. What he didn't expect was me sitting in the living room, every light on, a stack of papers on the coffee table, and my lawyer in the armchair across from me. His smile faltered just slightly, but I caught it. He knew. Or at least he suspected. "Sit down," I said, my voice steady, almost polite. He tried to make a joke, something about the serious atmosphere, but it landed flat in the room's heavy air. I reached for the photos first, laying them out one by one like cards in a losing hand. Then I pressed play on my phone. The recording of Melissa's trembling voice filled the space, each word slicing through whatever script he'd prepared in his head. His shoulders slumped. At first he tried to deny it, fumbling for explanations. Then came the half-admission, the pathetic line about it being just a mistake, and how he still loved me. I leaned back, studying him as if he were a stranger. "Mistakes don't last 9 months," I said evenly. "You've made your choice. Now live with it." I slid the divorce papers across the table, the pen resting neatly on top. His eyes darted to my lawyer, then back to me, as if waiting for some sign that this was negotiable. It wasn't. "You'll see the terms are already in place," my lawyer said, her tone calm but unyielding. "Joint accounts are closed. Access to shared assets has been revoked. All that's left is your signature." David blinked, processing the fact that the game was already over. He reached for the papers, but not before trying one last plea. "Elena, we can work through this," he said, his voice softer now, almost desperate. "I was stupid. I let things get out of hand. She doesn't mean anything to me." I watched him closely, noting how quickly he'd switched from defiance to begging. It wasn't love in his voice. It was the fear of losing comfort. I didn't raise my voice, didn't shed a tear. "You gave her gifts, David. You gave her time, affection, and now a child. You've already made your investment. I suggest you follow it through." His mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but no words came. The silence between us said more than anything else could. He signed. Not right away, but slowly, as if each letter of his name was an admission he didn't want to make. When the pen left the paper, I slid the documents back toward my lawyer without breaking eye contact. "We'll be in touch," she said, gathering them neatly into her folder. David sat there, his hands clasped, staring at the table like it might give him an escape. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. I stood, smoothing the front of my dress, feeling lighter than I had in months. "You should go pack a bag," I told him, my voice even. "You won't be sleeping here tonight." The look on his face was a mix of disbelief and panic, as if he was only just realizing that every door he thought he had left open was now locked tight. As I watched him leave, I didn't feel triumphant or bitter. What I felt was control, the kind of steady, unshakable calm that comes when you've taken your life back, piece by piece. But I knew the story wasn't over. There would be calls. Pleas. Maybe even apologies, and I was ready for every single one. The first call came 3 days later. I didn't answer, then another and another. By the end of the week, my voicemail was full, each message a different version of the same plea. "We can fix this. It was a mistake. She's not who I thought she was." His voice sounded smaller each time, stripped of the confidence he used to wear like a second skin. I listened to a few, not out of hope, but to remind myself why I'd walked away. Melissa had left him. That much was clear from the fragments he let slip. Apparently, once she realized the lifestyle she'd been chasing wasn't coming, she'd moved on. I imagined her packing up the gifts he'd bought with our money, sliding them into her purse without a second thought. For her, it was just the end of another round. For David, it was the beginning of a very long fall. I spent those days reclaiming my own space, rearranging the furniture, clearing out drawers he'd left behind. It wasn't about erasing him. It was about breathing again. Every room felt different without his presence, like the air had shifted, lighter and cleaner. For the first time in months, I could stand in my kitchen without hearing Melissa's voice echo in my mind. One afternoon, I found myself at the seaside cafe I used to visit with friends years ago. The wind carried the scent of salt and espresso, and the sound of the waves seemed to wash away the last traces of him. I sat at a small table by the window, watching sailboats drift lazily across the horizon. Across from me was Claire, my oldest friend, her laughter filling the space between sips of coffee. With her, I didn't have to explain or defend anything. She already knew, and she approved. At some point, my phone buzzed on the table. David's name lit up the screen, a familiar reminder of a life I'd already left behind. Claire raised an eyebrow, silently asking if I'd answer. I smiled, turned the phone face down, and kept talking. His calls no longer felt urgent. They felt irrelevant. The grip he once had on my thoughts was gone, replaced by the quiet certainty that I'd made the right choice. We talked for hours, about everything except him. Plans for a trip, the new book I'd started, how the sea air made the coffee taste even better. I realized I wasn't just moving on. I was already gone. The only thing left was to decide how I wanted to close this chapter, and I knew exactly how it would end. The decision came as naturally as breathing. I didn't need a dramatic finale, no public confrontation or cutting remark. My silence was enough. That evening, back at home, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the last light of day spilling across the room. My phone lit up again with his name. I let it ring until it stopped, then turned it face down on the table. He could keep calling for the rest of his life, but I'd already answered in the only way that mattered, by moving on. Somewhere, Melissa was carrying his child. That was his reality now, not mine. She could have him, the promises, the lies, the endless games. I didn't want any of it. What I had now was infinitely better. Peace. The kind that doesn't need to be defended or explained. The kind that settles into your bones and stays. I took a long sip of my tea, watching the moon rise over the rooftops. She can have the baby, I thought, a faint smile tugging at my lips. I'll keep my peace. And with that, I let the night take me, feeling lighter than I had in years, ready for whatever came next. Because this time it would be mine.